Discuss his former State Department senior advisor, Christian Whiton. He's also with D.C. International Advisory. Christian, it's a pleasure to have you on today to share your perspective. You know, on Monday, President Obama faces a critical diplomatic showdown with Russia. During the G20 summit in Mexico, President Obama will finally get a chance to sit down face-to-face with Russian President Vladimir Putin. So what must he do in this meeting to find some common ground with Russia to bring an end to the escalating violence in Syria?
Well, Kelly, it's worth asking, I think, if there's any combination of words or charm the president can use on Vladimir Putin to get what he wants, and then even if that were to work, what he would get from it. This is not the first time this has been tried. Previously, the last meeting of the Gs, the G8, was stage managed so that Russia would show up and be pressured to do something more on Syria, to be more agreeable at the UN. But Vladimir Putin didn't even bother showing up for that. You know, ultimately, Russia defines what Russia's interests are. In Russia, Moscow at least seems to want the Assad regime to survive, or at least prefer it to any alternative. So it's just unlikely that any combination of words can get them to change their approach on this.
Can you give a reason as to why Russia would even want this Assad regime to survive when you look at what's going on there in terms of the violence?
Well, when Russia looks at the Middle East, it doesn't have a lot of strong allies, and it's always considered Assad one of them. It sells him arms, provides him arms, and really it's, you know, the concerns that the United States has in spreading accountable government, the rule of law, possibly democracy to parts of the Middle East. Russia really doesn't share any of those interests, or at least isn't as concerned with them. So Assad is frankly an okay guy to Moscow. They're just not that concerned with the human rights violations coming out of this regime or the trouble that Assad has caused for the United States in places like Iraq. In fact, Russia actually prefers that. So given the choice between Assad and possibly a Muslim Brotherhood-run successor or a successor regime that we just can't really define at this point, it chooses Assad.
Well, let's look beyond Russia right now and look right to the heart of Syria, because the human rights group Amnesty International releasing the facts as we look at some of the video of what's going on there. Here's what they're talking about. Syrian soldiers going in, executing young men, burning their homes, torturing those they arrest, and many of the victims are innocent children killed in this horrific violence. And then on the heels of that, Christian, we're hearing that UN observers have suspended their activities and patrols in Syria, causing the fear that violence could now get worse. So what do you expect to unfold in Syria now that UN observers are no longer monitoring the situation?
Right. I don't think things change that much with the UN gone. In fact, you know, better than listening to what Amnesty International has to say, listen to the Syrians themselves. One of their sort of a chief Syrian human rights spokesman, Abdul Rahman, you know, said the UN really didn't do much while they were here in Syria, so they might as well leave. You know, we've been having this debate over whether this will become a civil war, but frankly, it's looked like a civil war for quite a long time and is likely going to continue to be one until some sort of external factors change what's going on the ground.
Yeah, and that so-called Kofi Annan ceasefire that was to have taken place on April 12th, we haven't seen that take place at all. Meantime, the Western powers at this point, Christian, appear to have no desire to conduct any military intervention that actually helped get rid of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, recall. And it seems that sanctions on the Syrian government are not working as well. So what steps can you suggest that can be taken to stop the bloodshed that has reportedly claimed 14,000 lives in the conflict?
Right. Well, Kelly, I think there's a missing middle here. You do have, on the one hand, this approach that the Obama administration has taken, which is prioritized action in the UN, but that hasn't led to anything and is unlikely to lead to much. Then, on the other hand, you have the neocon approach championed by Senator John McCain that calls for a no-fly zone, which is really just a half-clever way of backing into yet another war, and one that the American people don't want. But there is this missing middle where the U.S. and its allies can help wage political warfare against the Assad regime, but most importantly, it's to arm the rebels, especially the factions of the rebels that are least inclined towards Islamism, and that would be friendliest to the U.S. We ought to get in there, work with our chief ally in the region, which is Turkey, and arm them, give these people the means to fight the war themselves and to prevail themselves and to survive.
Christian Whiton, good to share these comments with you and to have your perspective on this as we continue to watch what's happening in Syria. Thank you, sir.